Hey, what's going on, guys? Ben Brewster here, Triathletics. Today I want to do some sample breakdowns of some of the video submissions that you guys have sent in over the past couple weeks. I'm going to go ahead and link a Twitter thread down below where you can post your videos and potentially get selected for future breakdowns. So I'm just going to see how this does, see if you guys can learn something, take something away from this. And if this does well, then maybe this becomes a regular thing where I can give kind of these quick hit breakdowns of some of you guys so that everyone can kind of learn what we look for and kind of the variability in what different guys need to be working on, right? We aren't all going to be working on the exact same things, and nor should we be, because there are going to be different limiting factors and different approaches are going to be required as a result. But kind of first thing is really just a disclaimer, right? Like, I'm looking at these videos out of context. These are not pitchers that I work with. These are not pitchers that Tread works with or have worked with to my knowledge in the past. These are gonna be quick, abbreviated. I'm gonna try to spot a couple things for you guys to take away. There's a lot more that goes into performance than just mechanics as well. I think that's just always worth reiterating. I'm gonna reference this a decent amount, but just understanding, like, there's different slices to performance, and a lot gets made of velocity, a lot gets made of mechanics, and that's still just one small piece of what it actually takes to get to the highest level for your particular genetic capabilities. So there's a rehab and therapy piece, there's a prehab corrective piece, there's a psychological approach, strategy piece, strength and conditioning. That's all the body preparation work that goes into it, conditioning, nutrition, recovery. This includes sleep. There's the data analytics side, the pitch design side. There's so much more that goes into it besides just mechanics. So hopefully I'll do a good job of reiterating that throughout, is that there's a lot more that we look at when we actually work with an athlete than just their mechanics. That being said, I think there's still a lot we can take away from this. It's also worth noting, before we get into this, like, there really is no such thing as perfect mechanics. So anytime I'm doing a breakdown, I'm not comparing these guys to this one gold standard. I'm not saying, hey, everyone needs to look like Nolan Ryan. What I'm doing is, there's a number of different kind of broad principles that generally apply to efficient throwing mechanics. And so I'm looking at mechanics through a framework, but understanding there's a huge range and variation and variability that occurs within this. So depending on the height, weight, lever lengths, mobility, whether someone's more of an elastic driven athlete or not, how they produce their power, their mechanics are going to be very different, and what's optimal for them is not necessarily going to be what's optimal for somebody else. That being said, if you're flying open and you're landing completely trunk open to the target, right, we can reasonably deduce that is not an optimal pattern for that athlete, given what we know about how velocity is generated. But just taking it with a grain of salt, there is no such thing as quote unquote perfect mechanics that can be blanket applied to everybody. Also realizing it's just much harder to actually fix a problem than simply identify a problem. So I'm going to be identifying some things that stand out to me, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these are guaranteed problems that are holding you back. These are things that potentially would require further investigation, maybe some trial and error, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to go and change these things immediately, or that the fix is necessarily mechanical. I will try to give some actionable next steps, sample drills, some tips, so that you guys can, I'm breaking you down, you can actually take something away from this video, and it's not just saying like, oh, go drift more, good luck. I'm going to try to make this as actionable as I can within the context of this video. Probably going to be half an hour, 45 minutes long, somewhere in that range, and hopefully going to be doing these a little bit more regularly. But that being said, let's get into this first player here. This is Brandon. He's 5'9", 93, says he's up to 94. Played through a couple times just so you guys can kind of get a feel for it. So off the bat, like, what's one of the first things I'm thinking when I look at something like this? Well, he's not a big guy at 5'9", so if he's already touching mid-90s, right, I'm already expecting relatively efficient patterns at this point, because he's a guy who's not dealing with a ton of, his levers aren't on his side. I don't know what his weight is. I'm assuming he's decently athletic, decently built. It looks to be that way. But again, typically a lot of other factors are going to be going right for an athlete when they're this undersized, throwing this hard. A lot of the most efficient throwers in the big leagues in the world isn't the 6'6" guy throwing 95, it's the 5'9" guy throwing 95, right? That guy has to move that much more efficiently to be able to generate that type of velocity with his limited lever lengths. So at a glance, right, already very clean movement. Here's what I'm seeing. Okay, he's got a very aggressive drift and first move, which is generally a good thing. You can see as he begins to lift his leg, he's already moving his belly button, his center mass forward down the mound, and as he actually drops into his back leg, before he actually kind of catches his back leg, he's covered a lot of ground away from the rubber. He might be 2 feet away from the rubber, away from, you know, where he started. So he's got a really aggressive drift. I do like the kind of eyes down, being able to pick up a target a little bit later, feeling more athletic, and, you know, for a lot of guys not being so fine focused on the target from when they get the pitch call or you know, decide what they're going to throw to when they actually deliver the pitch. A lot of guys, myself included, cannot just fine focus on the target the entire time. So bringing the eyes down for a split second can be really, really helpful for guys to actually be more consistent. He's got a little bit of that coil, which for guys with good hip internal rotation, that can really help take a little bit of slack out of this back hip. So help kind of pre-wind and pre-tension that back hip a little bit more by having that coil. So seems to be working for him. I'm a fan of that. If we look at the back foot position, one of the things I look for is that back foot moving all over the place? Is it rolling out into supination? Is he coming way up on the toes super early, even during the leg lift? At this point in the delivery, we want this to be stable. It is. As he drops into the back leg, we want it to be stable. It is. And again, it's not until he gets into the unload phase right about here that he begins to bring the heel up off the ground a little bit. So generally, I like what I'm seeing there. Does he rotate into landing or extend and push into landing? He looks to be rotating into landing. What I'm looking for here is the direction that this back knee takes. Now, as the hips rotate, it's going to bring that back knee down to the ground. Guys that push or jump or lunge off the back leg, you're typically not going to see that. You're going to see an extension happening. This knee is going to extend as the quad fires into triple extension. Ideally, we want to see this knee driving down to the ground as the hips actually rotate. So that's a sign that he's rotating. And from the side view, again, we want to see this knee traveling down in this direction, not extending out. So the knees driving down, which is a sign that the hips are rotating, the pelvis is rotating. And again, you can see he's holding some knee flexion there as he rotates. Guys who really overextend, you're going to see this in almost a straight line or much straighter line on the back leg at this point at landing. Let's go to the arm action here. So ideally, we're looking for no huge breaks, kinks, hitches in the chain. And from when he breaks his hands, that's a pretty fluid, continuous arm spiral. No major lags, no major hitches, no major inefficiencies. Where is he at landing? Well, he's at 90 degrees of elbow flexion, give or take. He's right in line with the shoulder angle. So he's right about 90 degrees of abduction, this angle right here, which means he's in line with the shoulders, he's in plane. So that's good at landing. You can see from the back view, he's in a ton of scap retraction as well. So he's creating a big stretch through his pecs, through basically the anterior core, anterior side of his shoulder. As he begins to rotate, we want to see that elbow stay in plane. And again, we can tell that it does appear to be in plane right here. Connect the shoulders, draw a line through the elbow. Where is he? He's still in plane. So he's rotating around that axis very, very well. Lead leg, we want the lead leg to plant, stabilize. Don't want this knee to continue moving forward. It doesn't. So he actually has a really good paw back mechanism, good lead leg block there. And then again, we can't see the front knee perfectly from this back view, but from a plant from back or front view, we'd want this knee not to continue caving out towards first base. And you can see it doesn't. He blocks well there too. Intensity looks good. He's throwing 93.6 in a bullpen. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. I've got guys who are up to 98, 99 games who, I mean, this would be a really good number for them in a bullpen. So again, kind of depends, but overall, there's a lot of good stuff happening. Great layback, not pushing, hitting his layback back behind the ear, so not out in front of the face. Pretty high arm slot. Looks like he's able to probably create some pretty high vertical break numbers just with this degree of tilt that he's able to create on the baseball. So speculating a little bit, but just with this release height, with this posture, probably going to be a carry guy, which is great for shorter pitchers. Jack Leiter, good example of a shorter pitcher, maybe a little bit lower slot than Brandon here, but because he's shorter, he's got a lower release height from that, but he's still able to create carry and vertical break with his fastball. So he's still able to kind of create this really flat vertical approach angle. It's really this fastball really keeps playing in a much more deceptive way for some of these high carry shorter pitchers. So this can actually be an advantage, believe it or not. Other considerations, again, 93 plus in a bullpen setting. You really should get a boost in a game. I don't know if this is just like, I don't know what you sit in bullpens versus in the game, but if you're able to do this, like, I don't see any reason that you couldn't be 93, 95, touching 96 or higher in a game setting. So this is pretty good. One recommendation would be to throw standard hitters into any sort of like velocity pen. This actually isn't the same throw, and these clips I'm going to be showing, they're not all the same throw, right? I've combined the back and the side view together into one clip and synced them up. But these are different throws. So on the left here, this is to a catcher. On the right, obviously, just to a net. But I would recommend doing these if you're going to do the velo type pens, which is more of an off-season thing, doing them to a catcher and doing them with a stand-in hitter, and ideally even if you're just doing fastballs, have the catcher call the pitches for you and keep counts. So 0-0, 0-1, 0-2, whatever. It's going to make it a little bit more game-like, even though the focus can purely be letting it eat, or at least letting it eat within the context of there's a hitter here, there's a catcher here, the catcher's calling pitches, and we're just trying to blow up kind of the center of the zone. But to me, that's a lot more of a specific way to do a velo pen versus just kind of spraying it into a net. Okay, so let's say you were throwing 91, right? And you had to throw 93. You weren't at this kind of minimum threshold here, but you're moving this cleanly. Some things that could potentially help, right? These are things that would be worth trialing and erroring at some point in the off season. And I wouldn't be 100% convinced they would help, but there's a chance they would help. So one is you have a pretty extreme drift, which we talked about, right? The issue can be, and I've experienced this myself, there is such a thing as over drifting to where you actually lose the back leg. So imagine if, as you lifted your leg, you were already way out here and you're just falling down the mound, right? That would be over drifting. But if you lift your leg and you don't gain any ground and you just stay completely stuck over the rubber, that's a balance point. That's the opposite end of the spectrum too. So there's a happy medium somewhere in between when it comes to the drift. You're pretty far on the extreme of this is a really aggressive drift. So I almost wonder if as you kind of fall down here into your back leg, I wonder if actually toning down the drift a hair and being able to feel the back leg a little bit more. And I'm not talking about going too far to the other end of the spectrum, but toning down the drift just a hair could reap some benefits for you. I experienced this myself a few years ago when I was like 96 in bullpens, just trying to drift as far as I possibly could. But when I actually toned it down a hair, I jumped up another mile an hour because I could stay in my back leg a little bit longer and feel weight through my back leg a little bit longer. This is something I just broke down a clip of Charlie Morton and also just tweeted a video of him as well. And I think he's a great example of he gets some drift, but he doesn't lose the back leg at all, and it's still very much back leg driven, back leg guided linear move. And whereas you start to get into this point where there's a little bit of that kind of falling action from here to here. So it could be worth trying. And then the other thing that, again, might be worth trying, you're not in that huge red flag zone, but it still could be benefit, is holding the trunk stack possibly a little bit longer. So I've had guys who, they're low to mid 90s, but when they into landing, this posture, this hinge and this trunk posture, they begin to extend a little bit early, and like so right here, you already begin to extend a little bit, but you haven't landed yet. So being able to delay that extension until just before landing can be helpful. I'm thinking of someone like Ben Joyce would be a good example. He really holds that kind of forward trunk posture, that hinge, and doesn't extend until the hip rotation is what extends his trunk. He doesn't extend his trunk artificially into landing. So holding the trunk down a little bit, the rib cage down, and the trunk posture a little bit longer could also potentially be like a 1 mile an hour unlock. Again, we're talking very subtle tweaks at this point. Again, we don't know your strength metrics, your power metrics, how well you're recovering. Like, you might have slept 3 hours the night before this and not been recovered, or you might have spent a month peaking just for this one throw, hitting 93.6, right? The context, we don't have the context here. You know, you're not in cleats, you're not on dirt. So you might have adrenaline, you might not have adrenaline. This might be 6 a.m. So we don't really know. Pitchability, right? It's worth noting, like Marcus Stroman, put him here, another, you know, kind of undersized guy throwing hard. His average velo in the big leagues is 93, right? I don't see why you couldn't be sitting 93 if you're able to do this in an indoor bullpen. So just recognizing, like, I showed this pie chart already, but like, it comes down to what is the limiting factor right now. It probably makes sense to try to shoot for and chase another couple miles an hour in the off season, but at the same time, you know, what are you pairing with that fastball? Like, do you have something with good depth and good velo that you can pair with it, that you can command well at any count? You're a high vertical break guy, most likely. If not, you should be. And so that would be something to work through if you're not. So considering a mid to upper 80s gyro slider, like, you can create good depth on and tunnel away from the carry fastball. Same thing, maybe a low 80s curveball. Again, looking for something sharp that doesn't jump up out of the hand and that comes out of the hand looking just like a fastball, and you can create that vertical separation between the two pitches on their way to home plate. So a lot of considerations here. Overall grade mechanically, I would say A minus or A. Pretty impressive, but just because it looks good on video and you hit checkpoints, it doesn't mean that things can't continue to improve, or that there aren't still areas for you to potentially throw harder, recover better, get stronger, get more powerful, get more mobile, smooth out these existing patterns better, repeat them better in a game setting. There's a lot more ways to continue improving. I think you could be a 93, 96 guy in games. And then a couple drills to try. I would say long tossing from your delivery could be beneficial. And when I say that, either out of just a leg lift or doing a leg lift crow hop, which I've talked about before. So literally going through your leg lift and jumping through the top of your leg lift, landing on the back leg, and you can throw out, you know, however far you're going in long toss, using that footwork. And then same thing on the pull downs coming in, you can use that footwork or just throw out of your delivery itself. That can help you find and hold the back leg a little bit better and feel like it's really underneath you and supplying a lot of power to the throw. If you like that feeling, which again, not everybody does, but I would say 90% of guys really like the feel of the leg lift crow hops, then doing a few of those on the mound as kind of your first 3 to 5 throws, just gunning a few to the catcher standing up, just to kind of feel that dynamic lower half action, finding the back leg and getting your arm speed there. A few of those at the beginning of your bullpen can be pretty helpful. And then if you are going to work on, you know, playing around with the amount of drift, walking windups tend to be a good way to do that, right? Step backs can encourage more drift, because you're leaving your center mass out front and stepping back. And so that can get a guy who doesn't have enough drift to get more. For me, walking windups were always a way to kind of feel the opposite end of the spectrum, coming in from behind with a lot of tempo. Almost forced me to not over exaggerate the drift, or I would just feel myself falling forward. So up tempo walking windups could be helpful for regulating just how much drift you need. And then when it comes to the trunk stack that I talked about, one thing that could be helpful is throwing some of the core velo belt stuff on here. I would offset it a little bit towards the first base side, so it's pulling you back and open a little bit. So that could potentially be helpful as well. It's going to pull you back. It's going to want to extend you early, and so it's feeding that flaw, and so your body's going to want to hold the stack a little bit longer and resist that band pulling you open and pulling you up into early extension. And then potentially water bag dry reps, which you can message us and we can give you more information on that. But that's another way to just help load the upper half a little bit and potentially feel holding that trunk stack a hair longer. Player comp, I would say Jeremy Jeffress. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But lower half just reminds me of him quite a bit. He was a 100-mile-an-hour type guy, and kind of had a similar initial forward move and kind of aggressive aggressive drift and drop into his backside. So check him out. All right, next player we're gonna look at is Aiden. Here's Aiden. Played this through a couple times. So Aiden's 69 to 71 miles an hour. He's 5'8", 140 pounds. I'm assuming he's 15, 16, maybe 17 years old. Trying to make his high school varsity team. I'm just guessing. So again, a little bit undersized, possibly still growing, definitely underweight. So just off the bat, we know like he's a guy who probably needs to put on 30 pounds of good weight, add quite a bit of strength. And I'm assuming his goal is to throw, mid 80s or so in the next couple years. So again, making some assumptions here, but as I just kind of go through this, I think he's got a decent first move, decent drift, right? Like nothing completely terrible has happened at this point. You can see his knee is shot forward a little bit already. So I kind of take that back, but a decent drift from the side here. Ultimately what happens next though, is this is a very quad dominant move, which again, there are big leaguers who throw 100 miles an hour who have a quad dominant lower half. So that doesn't immediately preclude him from being able to salvage this delivery. But you can see the knee shoots way forward over the toe, and he's in way more of this kind of front squat posture, whereas he's up and back, as opposed to hinging into this rear hip, into this rear glute, which is going to promote a little bit better rotation. Dropping into the quad is generally going to promote a little bit more of back knee extension, or kind of jumping off that back leg or pushing off the back leg versus rotating through the back hip. So generally that's what you'll see. Another thing to realize, it looks like as he's loading this lead leg, his body wants to hold some internal rotation. It looks like he's got okay internal rotation, and he's kind of trying to hold that load, and then his lead leg just kind of pops open super early. So he's not able to really hold and keep that tension in the back hip very long. You can see his heel wants to come up early. His lead foot kind of opens early as well. So again, we need to assess him and see what type of hip range of motion he's got, or what his hip rotation preference is. But it kind of looks like he's got good internal, and he's just not holding very much tension, or doesn't have anything to actually unload into landing or release into landing from that. So there's not much power into landing. I think the biggest issue though, the biggest immediate velocity limiter is the position of his elbow at landing. So we look at the line of his shoulders. Where should his elbow be? Right about here. Where is his elbow? Down here. Now, when your elbow is this low at landing, and you then go to rotate the trunk at foot strike, all right, it's not in plane. It's just as much of a problem as if the elbow was up here. The elbow is not in plane with where the trunk is rotating, so most of that energy is not actually making its way out through the humerus and ultimately into the ball. So there's going to be some wonky stuff going on. So watch the path the elbow has to take. The elbow has to take this scooping path where it goes up and underneath, and then gets back up into plane closer to release. So right there, you can see the elbow scoops down, drags, and then it comes back up. So again, the elbow takes this downward path that has to come up into release. And so what's he probably going to see most of the time? He's going to see that he's missing up. He's elevating balls. The ball's going to come up out of his hand. He's going to have a hard time keeping the ball down and locating it down. And obviously you can see kind of that immediate uphill arc on the throw, and the ball kind of sinks back down due to gravity there. So big thing is figuring out, how do I get, how do you get Aiden, or how does Aiden get his elbow up and in plane, and also create some of this scap retraction at landing, so that as he does go to rotate, he can actually make sure that he's transmitting that trunk rotation out and around into the upper arm and into the ball, versus just dragging on his shoulder. As he rotates, again, you can see there's really no layback happening right here. His arm is down here, so he's just dragging it through. When the arm's actually in plane, now it has a chance to actually lay back and for the scapula to tilt and the arm to work how it's supposed to work. But when the arm's down here and you go to rotate, you just drag on it until it gets back up and in plane. So he's dragging on the arm right here. He does get layback, but it's happening at the very last second. It's happening way out here at the very last second, and he's getting a little bit of that pushing action where the elbow's out in front of the face. Tries to compensate, tries to come back downhill through it, but really can't recover at that point. So there's a lot going on here. Overall, biggest limiting factors are the elbow is low, not getting in plane, really quad dominant back leg load, but that's not his main issue. The main issue, the easiest 10 miles an hour he will ever gain is from putting on 30 pounds, adding a significant amount of strength. He probably needs to add 150 pounds to his squat. He probably needs to add 150 pounds to his deadlift and 100 pounds to his bench press or dumbbell bench press or equivalent upper body, strength movements. He likely has some mobility limitations through his T-spine and scap. This is somewhat speculation because it could just be that he's not moving efficiently, and so he's not demonstrating that range of motion. But he doesn't create much thoracic range or counter rotation here, and he doesn't obviously get the elbow and get the arm into scap retraction and be able to flip up the arm. So I'm instantly thinking on his assessment, like, okay, are the pecs an issue, lats an issue, subscap, thoracic spine? I want to see these assessments and see, if what I'm kind of looking at from this position is actually a tissue issue or a mobility issue, or if it's really just he needs to learn how to move more efficiently and it's more of a patterning issue and he has the available range of motion. So those are some of the things I'd be looking at. I think he needs to learn how to hinge. So when we see this immediate knee forward position, right, he needs to learn maybe box squats, deadlifts. He needs to get comfortable actually loading up his weight vertically and into this glute. So maybe slow eccentric box squats, slow eccentric deadlifts, RDLs, learning how to hip hinge and actually load that position will actually give him a chance of finding it in his delivery. And then it's a whole other issue of being able to pattern that in your delivery as well. Overall grade, I gave a C+ here, which really just means there's a lot of room for improvement, from this point. I think at a strong 175, 180 pounds with the arm up, sitting into the back hip better. I think Aiden is a mid-80s guy. I think he's touching at least 83 to 85. I think that's a 1.5 to 2 year time frame is pretty realistic for that. And then as far as a comp, I put Rohan Honda, who's one of our former guys, who still with us, but one of the guys who he was formerly mid-80s at Yale as a lefty, and a year and a half later he was mid-upper 90s. And his big issue, he had a lot of mechanical issues, but the big one was that he had a low elbow. And so he did a ton of things to help get that elbow back and in plane, and it was both a mix of mobility and a mix of different patterning drills. I'll link that down below in the description so you can see more, but pendulum throws, lasso drill to feel that arm up and on plane as opposed to down here. And what does it feel like to get it up and actually rotate down from this point and get downhill versus rotating and having the elbow climb. Tension 10 toes drill, so adding in the full arm spiral and being able to sync that up. And then I really like the idea of catch play with a 7-ounce baseball. The first few throws, first 10, 15 throws, just nice and easy with a 7-ounce baseball. We've really seen some added feedback for guys to be able to feel that arm get into a little bit of a deeper, more fluid kind of flip up position and in plane by upping the weight slightly of the baseball, then going back to a baseball for the rest of your catch play, but trying to use that as a way to add a little bit of proprioception and awareness of what your arm is doing in space. And then again, likely needs some tissue work through the upper body, through the scap, just like Rohan did, to help that arm actually begin to move better and not be fighting so many of these kind of internal restrictions within the joint itself. That's a battle you're going to lose every time if you try to purely address it from a patterning standpoint when you get on the mound, if there is indeed truly a mobility restriction in place. So that's Aiden. Last one we'll do today. This is a pretty interesting one. So this is Kiefer, played this a couple times. So, I mean, throwing 95 in a bullpen, pretty good, pretty smooth, looks pretty powerful at a glance. When I first saw this, I thought he was like 6'6". because it looks like he's very, very long, very loose. This says he's 6'3", 185, 93, 94, up to 97. Average vertical break, 18 inches. So, I mean, pretty good numbers there. I don't know how old he is. I'm assuming a college kid, just judging by where he's throwing. But first things first, so these are not the same throw. These are different throws, but obviously on the left here, I don't know if you can see this. On the left, I would almost rather you not throw off a mound than throw on a mound that's too short like this, because now you're, at least for me, whenever I've tried to throw off a mound like this, the mound first off moves on me half the time, and then my body would subconsciously be kind of guarding or unsure about the footing and the landing, because I'm going from throwing on a slope to landing on flat ground. So maybe it's no issue for you, but I have seen this, you know, be an issue. Almost the same as like throwing on a super crappy dirt mound is almost just not worth doing, because then there's a potential for developing a lot of mechanical compensations as well. So I'm not saying I see any huge compensations here, but I would just be cautious with the actual mound. On this left throw, it does look like the elbow is potentially a little bit low. Let me backtrack a little bit. So I love the hands over the head. I love the tempo. I love the rhythm here, the drift, good drift. Sinking down, finding the back leg, so good drift while still finding the back leg, dropping into it. Glove arm, throwing arm, working together, holding posture, holding the trunk posture, not super into the quad, staying close on the lead leg. Firm lead leg block, gets the front foot down, not extending through the back leg, turning over that back foot turns over. You can see the trunk is staying closed really well here. The arm is getting up. This is really good retraction and flip up position. So I'm thinking, you know, really good mobility through this entire chain. That's a pretty good position right there. Elbow does not look low here on the right in this actual you know, bullpen. To me, it does look low here on the left. So this might just be something to be aware of, keep in mind, especially with, I don't know if this was a plyo throw or just a throw into a net, or what the context of that throw is, but that might be something to be aware of, that you do need to just kind of keep an eye on, is if that does get too low, it's going to be hard to actually get on top of the ball. You mentioned 18-inch vertical break. I definitely believe that with how high you're getting. So definitely a guy who you might want to be, you know, again, having something with depth to pair with that, whether it's a hard gyro slider in mid-upper 80s or whether it's a firm like 80 to 82 plus mile-an-hour curveball. To pair with that, I wouldn't chase a ton of depth on either of those pitches as much as just chasing something firm and sharp that comes out of your hand like a fastball. Really good extension, releasing out over the front foot. Look at your layback. Yeah, getting great layback. Maybe climbing the elbow a hair from this position. The elbow looks like it might be a little bit up above the plane of the shoulders. So again, if you were to ever get a little bit of shoulder, you know, impingement type symptoms, that might be something to look into. Is, you know, possibly dropping the elbow a hair, bringing it a little bit back in plane with the shoulders. Again, that's probably a minor thing. You're within kind of an acceptable bandwidth there. Overall, I would say I give this an A as far as mechanics. Obviously, high level mechanics. If you see someone throwing mid upper 90s in a bullpen, mid 90s in a bullpen, typically they're going to have pretty efficient mechanics. But you know, what jumps out? First thing that jumps out to me, again, we go back to this. You know, we're looking for what is the overall overarching limiting factor from kind of a bird's eye big picture view. It's not just, hey, mechanics and that's the only thing that matters. You're 185 pounds, you probably need to put on 25 pounds over the next year and a half, while aiming to retain all the mobility you do have. You have good mobility, you have good patterns, you need to get stronger. The low elbow might indicate some lat stiffness. That's something I'd be looking at in a movement screen, just to see if, you know, there is anything going on from a tissue standpoint that once cleaned up, you know, you don't even have to think about it. The elbow just gets in a better slot. I think this is just a helpful point as well. Like as coaches, you know, as a coach myself, one thing I've realized is there's a time and a place for tinkering with mechanics. And there's a time when the mechanics are in a really good spot, and it's not necessarily time to continue altering things because you can potentially do more harm than good at a certain point. One of the things I put here was in regards to Jacob deGrom, and from I believe 2017, 2018, somewhere around there, his patterns were in a really good spot, but he continued to gain velocity every year for the next several years, and the mechanics were not significantly different. But when he was asked like what he'd been focusing on over like 2020 on his own just to continue getting better, he really just said, I've been focusing on using my existing patterns and being as smooth as possible. So there's something to take away from that. Once your mechanics are in a really good spot, you can still work on being smooth, still work on being efficient, see how hard you can throw with as little effort as possible in your catch play every day, in your touch field bullpens. Billy Wagner talked about trying to throw hard easy all the time. How hard can I throw this ball with as little effort as possible? So there's still little games like that you can play to try to squeeze more out of your existing patterns without necessarily changing the underlying joint angles that you're getting into. It's just smoothing over the patterns that you're already getting in and out of. Just like if you're learning a dance move, you've mastered the positions, but how powerfully and smoothly can you flow through those positions at this point? That's kind of how I see the evolution of those last couple miles an hour, couple percentage points of efficiency once a guy's gotten to very close to where he needs to be. Predicted velo, I think if you get to 205 pounds, 210 pounds, I don't know your lifting metrics. I'm assuming they're okay because you're actually throwing very hard even at 185 pounds. But get those to where they need to be. Look at the lifting thresholds that we've put up before. Mid 400s deadlift, mid 300s squat, and I hate to say bench press because we don't have all our guys barbell bench press, but being able to move around 100-pound dumbbells either in dumbbell bench press or low 200s barbell bench press type equivalent. Getting to some of those just baseline strength numbers while putting on about 20-25 pounds, there's a high probability that that's going to be that 2 mile an hour unlock that you're looking for. So I think predicted velocity, there's no reason you couldn't be a 95, 98, 96, 98 guy, even touching 100 miles an hour, which is cool to say. But I certainly see that. We've worked with guys who are way more screwed up and have way worse mechanics than you have, and have made much bigger jumps than that. So I would say player comp, Tyler Glasnow. I know he's a little bit of a bigger guy, more physical, but I mean the way you're throwing and just the patterns you're getting into, I think that's an appropriate comp, all things considered, especially with that extension you're able to create. Definitely reminds me of kind of a Glasnow-esque finish. So yeah, I would stop tinkering too much with mechanics if you are, and learn how to eat. Download our ebook or our free nutrition guide. Make sure you're on a really good structured lifting plan, and I mean the sky's the limit. It's pretty cool to see examples like this. I play with dozens and dozens of guys in the minor leagues that the sky was the limit for them as well, and it's really just a matter of, can you actually put together the pieces of the puzzle, right? Maybe you get to an A on the kind of throwing and mechanics side, but maybe your command's garbage, right? Maybe your curveball movement profile is garbage. Maybe your nutrition, you haven't figured that out. I mean, kind of already know that because of where your body weight's at. Maybe your strength and conditioning programming isn't good, and your lifting metrics aren't good. Like, there's so many other areas to be constantly evaluating that we just need to take a step back and keep that in context when evaluating what's holding you back from being the absolute best that you possibly could be. I'm going to cut it there with those 3 breakdowns. I've got a bunch more in the wings ready to go. I'm going to do another breakdown shortly, but you guys let me know what you thought of this breakdown. If you took anything from it, if you learned anything, if you would like the format to maybe be a little bit different in terms of how I break these down, or if you kind of appreciate how I went through it, breaking down the flaws, other considerations, predicted velo, kind of giving a player comp, and doing it with that format. All that being said, like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I will see you guys in the next video. If you guys want more information on a breakdown for yourself, we do have a much more thorough mechanical analysis service that we offer. So you guys can check that out on our website, where again, we'll look at all these different variables, hop on a call, review everything. So there's a one-time service there. And then obviously with our remote coaching, it's significantly more in depth, where mechanics are just a small fraction of what we're actually evaluating, looking at. So for more information on that, just go to our website, shoot us an email, contact@triathletics.com, and we'll get you guys set up with that. I think that's everything. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.